Welcome back to our Clemson Finest series. I'm Will Vandervoort as we continue speaking with longtime Clemson Sports Information Director Tim Bourret. Tim, we talked in the last segment about, the 1980 basketball team and what that did for the upstate of South Carolina and how exciting it was for you guys to be there. The next year, even though you were doing basketball, you still helped, I know, during the season with football, but not as your primary then. But still, what can you remember about that 1981 season and how, now I think people kind of expect Clemson to be there and everything. Back then, nobody had a clue this was going to happen. Am I right?
No. It was just me and Mr. Bradley, and then Kim Kelly came down as another assistant just about that time. But you were involved in all the sports, so I had a lot of input on football also. But at the end of the 1980 season, of course, we defeated South Carolina 27-6, and that was a huge win to end the year on a roll. And we had, I think, 19 starters back for the next season. But still, we weren't on anybody's radar from a national standpoint. Mm-hmm. I guess it's been done since then, but in the AP poll going in the 1981 season, we didn't get a single poll point. Never mind being ranked in the top 20. They only had 20. Only ranked 20 in those days. They didn't start doing 25 until 1989. So it really did kind of come out of nowhere that season. Although we, in the 6-5 year, the year before, we'd been competitive with, in particular, Georgia had a close 20-16 loss down there in which we outgained them by like 200 yards.
Danny Ford told me that he says, I still don't know how we lost that game. He said they didn't have a single first down in the first half, and somehow we're down 10 points.
Total offensive plays in the first half of that 1980 game was 56-10.
Oh my
Georgia
goodness.
only ran 10 plays in that first half. But anyway, then that the next year in 1981 we played Georgia and then defeated them at Clemson 13-3, and that's when everybody started to say, "Oh, now wait a minute, let's take a look at this Clemson team," because Georgia was the defending champion and still had Herschel Walker and some great players. So we kind of took off from there.
That year, Danny says it was a North Carolina game to him that kind of said we could be pretty special, and this team maybe can win a national championship. How do you remember it? Was it that game? Was it that week? When was the moment you thought, man, this team maybe can do something?
Yeah, well, that was the national attention for the team kind of reached a crescendo because after that game, Sports Illustrated did a major feature on us, and obviously going into that game to think about having somebody come and cover the game. They had to feel that we were kind of on the rise. I felt that looking back at the season, that the Georgia game was absolutely huge. They were ranked 4th in the country, and as I said, had been undefeated the year before. So, but the winning 10-8 in that game in Chapel Hill on the road against a top 10 team, that certainly did bring us to another level as far as the nationally. The scope of the program.
Now, I found this surprising after I started working with you. In the Orange Bowl, you weren't there.
I was not there.
You did not get to see them in person win the national championship. What were you doing?
Well, I was with the basketball team. And so, as I said, my priorities were still with basketball. And so, although the basketball team did not play on that day, but we had a game the next day. And Bill McClellan, who was the athletic director at the time, in case there was bad weather or somebody had to be with the basketball team in Raleigh to make sure we could, have that game covered and, broadcast it on the radio. Because now I remember Jim Phillips couldn't broadcast the game; he could go to the game.
That's right.
But in those days, the networks had deals with bowl games to broadcast their games on the radio nationally, and it aced out the local. I mean, that would never happen today. Think that your own local network couldn't broadcast the game. We think about that now; it's just ridiculous. But Jim still went to the game, and so. Mr. McClellan didn't want to have both of us there and then have nobody, which I totally understood. I agreed with him 100%. It Shame I didn't get there. Clemson's won 6 national championships in all sports, and the only one I have not been in attendance for is that game. I went to the 2 soccer matches. I was with the golf team, and in these last 2 national championships in football, I've been present for, but wasn't at that one.
Wow, that's crazy. I remember I was kind of surprised the first time I heard that because I just didn't really think about it, that you had that tie with basketball at that time. And now, obviously, the 80s wasn't all glory. I mean, it was from a football wins and losses standpoint, but there were some issues you had to go through. We've talked about this before, back when you were still at Clemson. What was those times like in sports information for you, Mr. Bradley, and the crew, when you had to handle the NCAA investigation and all that stuff? And it wasn't just football either. You had to do basketball too later on in the decade.
Right, yeah, it was. There were some trying times, and the investigations or whatever started really at the end, towards the end of the '81 season. There was some articles in the Washington Post and some others. So, and there were times actually during the '81-'82 seasons that we had players who were, I remember doing interviews with the NCAA enforcement people over actually did the interviews in the press box in the stadium. So it was kind of distracting, but Coach Ford did a good job of holding things together as far as the players are concerned. And obviously we still had a great run of 32-2 from 1981 to 1983. But yeah, it was a time where you didn't know what was going to happen when you woke up in the next morning to go into the office, who was going to write what article about what. And so that was difficult in the first one, and then finally was put on probation. And it was a strange situation in that the announcement came in 1982, just before Thanksgiving, and so the football team was headed to Japan, and I was with the basketball team in Alaska.
Wow!
And actually, the football team on the way to Japan had a stopover in Anchorage, right where we were, to refuel. So when the announcement was made, the football team and the basketball team were both in Anchorage, Alaska.
Because that's where you go for your news and Clemson.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So, but anyway, so those were certainly some trying times, and to know you weren't going to go to a bowl game for 3 years. Now, the first year, of course, we accepted the bowl ban in 1982, but the bowl bids were just going to come out the next week, so we didn't actually feel it that much, because throughout the '82 season we didn't know if we were going to go or not.
Right.
And pretty much feel certain that we were going to go to the Cotton Bowl and play in the Cotton Bowl in 1982. But a wise decision was made to let's start the process now, and so you really only feel the effects for a couple of years. So, yeah. But those were trying times, and that but Mr. McClellan did a good job of getting us on replay. ESPN actually used to replay our football games in 1983, and
they were night games at night, right? Yeah,
they were played at night on a replay. Yeah, so we got some exposure, that way. And then later in the decade, of course, there was another investigation that we had to deal with, which I took over the job on July 1, 1989, and 6 weeks later, the Atlanta Constitution, Chris Mortensen, wrote this article that surprised us all, that we were under investigation by the NCAA, and we really didn't know a whole lot about it. And then two days later, the letter came. So he knew he had some really pretty good inside sources from
he does
the
that,
NCAA. Yeah,
he
even back then in 1989.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that's how it all started back then, that last year. And that was your first year, sports information. So,
as a director.
As the director, yeah. And also, if I'm not mistaken, didn't basketball shortly after that also go under some kind of investigation?
Yeah, the basketball was a little bit different in that it was purely one case of one player, and that was the eligibility of Wayne Buckingham.
Okay.
And Wayne was kind of an innocent, but he just took the courses they told him to take it at his high school, and then after he had already been here a year, the NCAA came back and said, this course you took should not have counted as a core course.
Wow.
And that was a landmark case, actually, because as a result of that case, they formed the clearinghouse. That's what led to the start of the NCAA clearinghouse, because schools felt that, well, it shouldn't be on the school to determine whether a course should count as a core course. There should be a central clearinghouse to make that decision, and that's what happened. So basically, the NCAA ruled that Wayne should not have been eligible. He should have been a Prop 48, and they ruled that the NCAA tournament, his participation, he should have been ineligible. So we had to vacate those games in the 1990 tournament.
Yeah, and of course, I believe the next year Clemson went to the Sweet 16, right? Or is that the 89-90 and then 90-91?
No, 89-90 is the year Wayne's freshman year.
Was Wayne's freshman year.
Was when we did go to the Sweet 16. Yeah.
So that had to be another pretty good run for you. You were just doing the radio then at that time.
Right. Yes.
So how different was that, just to be the radio guy and not have to worry about all the other ins and outs?
Well, I did have to do.
You do
in
have to do that?
89-90, I still was in
still doing
charge
that?
of everything. Yeah, so
Okay.
I was still oversaw everything. So I had to deal with that also. So yeah, that was a tough 7 years as far as that's concerned with dealing with those. But we got through it.
But that team in 1990 was the best team after that 1980 team that went to the Elite Eight.
Right.
So the run those guys went on, and then that Connecticut game, probably in my opinion, is still, of all Clemson sports, the most heartbreaking defeat Clemson's ever had. How do you remember?
Yeah. People ask me, what was when I did retire last year, I did some interviews with people about that types of superlatives, and yeah, Tate George's shot was, and plus when you think now, after that shot, Clemson didn't go to the tournament again for 6 years.
Yeah.
So that was really a difficult pill to swallow, so to speak. So, but that was an exciting year, 1989-90. Actually won 26 games on the court and won the regular season of the ACC for the first time. That Duke game would beat Duke and Christian Laettner, 97-93, high-scoring, thrilling game. They clinched at least a tie for the title. And then the next week, Duke lost at Chapel Hill that Sunday, and gave us the title outright.
It was a fun year. It was also the year I learned that I need to accept losing better because of that game. That's a long story for another day. But anyway, that wraps up this second segment with Tim Bourret. Stay tuned to TCI for more from Clemson's Finest series.